The solution was to take the best, most emblematic bands of that incredible time and try to tell their stories as completely as possible, with the full understanding that it would be but the tip of the iceberg. A lot of younger alternative rock fans know that the bands in this book are legendary. They just don't know why, which is kind of tragic. So if all I did was tell the story of the Minutemen, that would be rationale enough. If this book introduces but one person to a band as great as Mission of Burma, I will have done my job. If this book makes but one person realize the profound debt the alternative rock boom of the 90s owed to great bands like Husker Du and The Replacements, well, you get the idea. This book is devoted solely to bands who were on independent labels. So REM, for instance, didn't make the cut, since the band's pre-Warner albums were recorded for IRS Records, whose releases were manufactured and distributed by A&M, which in turn had a business relationship with RCA and later MCA. Correspondingly, the stories trail off when and if a band signed to a major label. Virtually every band did their best and most influential work during their indie years, and once they went to a major label, an important connection to the underground community was invariably lost. Note also that the book concentrates on the band's stories rather than their music. If you'd like to know more about the music, you should listen to it. As of this writing, virtually every record referred to in the book is still in print. Independent has several definitions, but the one this book uses is the crucial question of whether a label distributes its records through one of the corporate music behemoths. In the period in question, they were the so-called Big Six: Capitol, CBS, MCA, Polygram, RCA, and WIA, which allows them entree to vastly more stores than the smaller independent distributors. All kinds of advantages stem from this distinction, from access to commercial radio to the ability to attract name artists. Indie labels had to develop obscure artists on a grassroots level, essentially functioning with one or more arms tied behind their back. American independent labels are nothing new. Legendary labels like Motown, Stax, Chess, Sun, and Atlantic were all once independent. But by the mid-70s, most of the key ones had been swallowed up by the majors. A lot of rock indie records of that time were one-offs, like the 1974 Hey Joe Piss Factory single on Merrill Records, recorded by a visionary New Jersey woman named Patti Smith and paid for by her photographer friend Robert Mapplethorpe. But taking their cue from pioneering English indie punk labels like Stiff and Chiswick, more and more people realized that calling up a pressing plant and getting their own record manufactured wasn't the mysterious, exclusive privilege of the giant record companies on the coasts. A door was opened, and a small trickle of people stepped through it. Independent record labels began springing up all around the United States in the late 70s in order to document punk rock and its offshoots. It all started simply because they were great bands that would never be signed to major labels. In true capitalist tradition, entrepreneurs recognized a need, however small, and catered to it. Suddenly, there were indie labels all over the map: 99 in New York, Black Vinyl in Zion, Illinois, Frontier in Los Angeles, Twin Tone in Minneapolis, DB in Atlanta, and on and on. But doing an end run around the powers that be will always have an inherent ideological spin. A lot of forward thinkers had seen how the major labels had devoured the first generation of British punks, particularly the Sex Pistols, and resolved to retain control of their own destiny. As writer Mike O'Flaherty has pointed out, early British post-punk labels such as Rough Trade were part of the tide of political radicalism that swept Britain in 1978-79. Political radicalism was built into the post-punk model, and its implications would reverberate through American indie in the political big sleep of the Reagan years like a half-remembered promise. To begin with, the key principle of American indie rock wasn't a circumscribed musical style. It was the punk ethos of DIY, or do-it-yourself. The equation was simple. If punk was rebellious and DIY was rebellious, then doing it yourself was punk. Punk was about more than just starting a band, former Minutemen bassist Mike Watt once said. It was about starting a label. It was about touring. It was about taking control. It was like songwriting. You just do it. You want a record, you pay the pressing plant. That's what it was all about. The breakthrough realization that you didn't have to be a blow-dried guitar god to be a valid rock musician ran deep. It was liberating on many levels, especially from what many perceived as the selfishness, greed, and arrogance of Reagan's America. The indie underground made a modest way of life not just attractive, but a downright moral imperative. At first, though, a pragmatic stance was a necessity more than a statement. It wasn't a PR move, it was the best we could do at the time, says former Husker Du singer-guitarist Bob Mould. It was real simple. When you're